Giving everyone just a few minutes to come in the door. Oh, Joel. All right. Still have people coming in, or do you think we can go ahead and kick it off?
I think we can go ahead and kick it off. I'm seeing some good attendees. I recognize some of the names on here, so it's good seeing everyone.
All right, very good. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for our Wednesday webinar. It is Wednesday, October 28th. I cannot believe it's almost Halloween. My name is Shanna James. I have a couple of colleagues joining me today. I have Joel with us as usual. And then I also have Paige Parker joining us to help with some of the questions. And then I have a very, very special guest joining today, and he's actually going to be the one presenting. I have Jeremy Wagner from Lubbock-Cooper ISD, and he's going to share a little bit of how they've implemented calibration in his district. So I'm going to pass it off now to Jeremy, and he's going to take over our show. So Jeremy, welcome.
Excellent. First, thank you guys for having me today. I really appreciate the opportunity to kind of share some of our practices and what we've been trying to do to calibrate our evaluator, specifically for the teacher incentive allotment. But I do want to note that if you happen to be here this morning or this afternoon, I should say, my apologies, and you aren't doing this for teacher incentive allotment, and if you aren't necessarily on T-test, most of what's included in my presentation today is still very applicable to just evaluator calibration when it comes to evaluating teachers. And so a bit about my background. I am the director of STEM and advanced academics out at Lubbock-Cooper ISD in Lubbock, Texas. And that's my email there. I'll put this up again at the end so you can get my contact email if you would like it. But as part of my responsibilities as the director of STEM and advanced academics, I am facilitating and coordinating a lot of our T-test efforts in the district. And so when it comes to new teacher orientation, when it comes to principal support and managing Strive even on the eduphoria side of things, that's one of my roles within what I do for the district. And as part of that, I got really heavily involved when T-tests implemented, when TEA implemented the student growth component for T-tests. I headed up that effort for our district, and it was a natural segue for me to move from implementing T-tests, student growth with T-tests, and then combining those efforts with trying to unroll the teacher incentive allotment for our district. And so that's kind of what brings me here today. And so a lot of what I'm going to show you today is kind of the brainchild of myself and a couple key leaders in our district, namely our Deputy Superintendent, Dr. Macy Satterwhite, and I, kind of pulling together our resources and our brain power to decide when it comes to calibrating our evaluators and making sure that we're meeting the needs and criteria of the teacher incentive allotment, what it is we needed to do and how we needed to do it. And so for today's objectives for our hour together today, this afternoon, I want to review very briefly the teacher incentive allotments requirements for teacher evaluation and inter-rater reliability to kind of set the stage on why this is critical for what we're doing now. I want to try to identify current evaluation trends within the district. So that's a goal that you should have, and kind of I'll run that through the lens of what we did and what we showed from our district perspective to our evaluators. Then I want to review and talk about reviewing and aligning a district walkthrough form and why that's critical with the aligning of your T-test efforts just in general. And then the last three bullets there, the objectives, are kind of a model that I want to show you guys on how we went through the process with our evaluators. And we did an I do, we do, you do model with getting kind of everyone on the same page, with just kind of touching back on base with T-tests and making sure we remembered what it was about and how we needed to be treating it and what was going to be happening and how we were going to be using it. As I'm presenting, if you have any questions, please put them up in the Q&A tool throughout the presentation. And Shanna and friends will be kind of sifting through those, and ones that are specific to like eduphoria style questions like Strive and how that works within this process. They'll be managing and helping you guys answer some of those. And ones that are specific to my presentation or specific to the processes that we did, I'll be answering those questions as well. And my goal is to try to address as many of those questions as we possibly can after my presentation concludes. And I'm aiming to speak for about 30 minutes so that we have 30 minutes to do some of the Q&A and really get deep into the weeds if you have the need and desire to get deep into the weeds. So to kind of start us off, calibrating evaluators in any school setting, and this even applies up into the business world. One of the real dangers we face when evaluating any kind of employee is rating creep over time. And it's a reality that as an evaluation tool is implemented and used over time, scores will tend to creep over time and artificially inflate potentially as years of implementation begin to pass. We saw that pretty heavily with PDOS. If your district participated with PDOS over the years, you were probably well aware of the fact that it was very check the box compliance, and we had very few teachers across the state that were considered ineffective or needing any kind of improvement. And so we kind of saw that with PDOS, and over time with T-tests, it's potentially possible to be having that occur within your own district. And so the opportunity and need to realign your evaluators is definitely necessary. And occasionally you need to go through steps that are a little more involved than just the re-upping of your certification every few years. I know that T-test builds that in, and it's built into T-test to re-up your certification every once in a while to help address this creep over time. But as you know, when it comes to doing your T-test certification, you can game the system just a little bit. And I won't necessarily talk about how to do that. If you haven't been trying to do that yourself, I don't want to give you any accidental clues or anything to that nature, but you know the reality. And so recalibration is definitely, it's something that needs to happen. You kind of see in the visual that I put together here, just in a hypothetical situation. If you look at the percentage of how many ratings are given across the T-test kind of rating rubric, in our example here in 2017-18, you can see there were no distinguished that were given, and quite a few proficients, and then a smattering kind of on the bottom end. But in that next year, you see some distinguished start to appear, accomplished grows, proficient maybe shrinks a little bit. And then finally in 2019-20, distinguished has grown quite a bit, accomplished has grown quite a bit. And this implies that within our district that we're approaching potentially 95% of our teachers in the district that are proficient or better, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but are our reflections or are our evaluations truly reflective of the makeup of what we have on our campuses and working with our students? So when we look at the causes of rating creep, one of the big ones is just unintentional bias. It's part of being a human being. Occasionally, your personal feelings about a teacher will begin to come into play. And I don't necessarily mean that from a negative bent, but actually from a positive bent. You build relationships with these people. You care about these people. You know what they're actually trying to do and accomplish in the classroom. And you tend to start ignoring the descriptors in the T-test rubric. And instead, you start worrying about, oh, this teacher really does try hard, instead of looking at the evidence and comparing that to the descriptors to give them an evaluation. Or maybe it's a potentially tough area to keep staffed and you want to keep this person happy and coming back. And so you give them ratings to make them feel good about life. Rating fatigue is something that definitely happens. And over time, especially if you're on a campus where you have to do 10, 15, and even 20 every single year, by the time you get to that 10th, 12th, 15th one, you're tired of doing it. And then kind of coupled with that rating fatigue is just a lack of time to invest in actually doing the evaluation the way it needs to be done. As we moved into T-tests, PDOS was pretty easy to implement, and it was pretty frequent for an evaluator to leave a classroom during an observation with the evaluation actually being done. And nowadays you leave the classroom and you've got to invest hours into making sure the evaluation is done correctly. And so fatigue and lack of time can play into rating creep as well. The flip side of that, though, is rating creep can occur due to improvement efforts, whether that's on the campus or throughout the district. As time goes, you get the opportunity to replace staff sometimes, and sometimes you get really lucky and you get to replace them with higher quality staff over time. And if you're replacing higher quality staff with lower quality staff with higher quality staff, then yeah, you're probably going to see ratings improve. And also you may see improvement efforts as a result of various initiatives and training that you're providing your teachers. Those initiatives and training might actually be causing, just an overall increase in scores because things really are better. And so we have to evaluate, we have to conduct and evaluate a calibration to either correct that bias or to verify that the improvement efforts that you've been doing on your campus or in your district are actually effective. And so that's kind of what we're looking at. So within the realm of the teacher incentive allotment, just a real fast overview, like I said, the idea is to get more money into teachers' pockets. And so within the 3 levels, you can kind of see the monetary breakdown there. But depending if you're in a low SES district and in rural in nature, your teachers could be making upwards of $32,000 additional in a year if they're designated as a master teacher. And that's not chump change by any stretch of the imagination. And so as we look at what's required from TEA and how the teacher incentive allotment is actually established, we have to create an inter-rater reliability assurance with TEA across all campuses in the district and all evaluators in the district, whether they're district level or campus level. And the reason for that is the teacher ratings that you submit to Texas Tech to get a designation for a teacher have to align with the designation and the student growth results that you turn in for those teachers. So just as an example, if you're turning in a teacher with distinguished and accomplished across the board, but their student growth numbers are less than stellar, that's a red flag for Texas Tech. They do not pass on that teacher for recommendation to TEA, or TEA doesn't approve them. Forgive me, because Tech just crunches the numbers. TEA does the approving. But TEA won't approve them after they see that mismatch, and your district's out $500 for that application. And so going through an inter-rater reliability process helps you ensure that you're doing the best you can to get money into teachers' pockets with this incentive allotment. So within the inter-rater reliability requirements, there's a success criteria document I have linked in this. And I'll work with my compatriots here with eduphoria to make sure you guys get a copy of this slideshow so you can use the links. But the success criteria is linked by TEA, and hopefully they'll load here in just a second. Actually, I have one preloaded right over here. If I can, there we go. Zoom in just a bit. Success factor 1 is about a strongly calibrated teacher observation system. And so the strength of the teacher evaluation rubric is relatively self-explanatory if you're using T-tests. If you're using T-tests, it's state approved, you're good to go. Schedule observations is something that has to be discussed, but then part C right here is about calibration for evaluators. Teacher evaluators have to be trained and are certified annually on the evaluation rubric, and district leadership has to implement a system of calibration within and amongst staff members. And then this other part I was talking about, there needs to be a congruence for observation scores and student growth scores. And so within these success criteria, this is kind of what we're looking at and why it's critical that we do these things. The other bullets back there, let me go back, just kind of detail what was on that success criteria. And so basically that's what we're trying to do, is just ensure that we're meeting the needs that TEA has to ensure that TEA is going to be implemented with fidelity. So if you're looking for additional insight on teacher incentive allotment, the teacher incentive allotment and the evaluation processes and those sorts of things, I have a link embedded here, and I won't click on it for this one, but it takes you straight to the resources and recommendation webinars that were put together for the teacher incentive allotment. And if you're looking for about 8 hours of solid, entertaining video viewing, I highly recommend you go plug into that. And even if you're not looking for entertainment, that you're just looking for more education on TIA in general, that link right there will take you exactly where you need to go. But the bottom line is we're trying to ensure that we have consistent ratings between campuses on the same document that helps provide reliability and validity with teacher ratings for various designations. I do want to highlight, and I didn't put this into the slideshow, but I do want to highlight the idea that when you dig into those resources and recommendations on the TIA website, your ratings on teachers, proficient is one of the goals in T-test. Proficient is rock solid teaching. And so if you have a teacher that's scoring proficient across the board, that doesn't mean they're not good enough to get a rating. And to the contrary, it means they're probably very good and are worthy of potentially receiving a rating if their ratings match up with growth numbers. And so just keep that in mind, that when you're communicating with teachers, if this calibration effort actually ends up pointing out, oh, we probably need to change our practice and back things off a little, you'll need to work on that culture aspect when communicating with teachers that Proficient's good. And that doesn't mean you're not going to get a designation. It just means we're aligning our efforts and trying to ensure that you get that money. So one of the first steps in getting started with a calibration effort is very clearly establishing the purpose with your staff members. And when doing this, you're not only establishing that purpose with teachers, but you're really establishing it with your district and campus leadership. Because our principals are some of the busiest people in our districts. You guys know that just as well as I do. You may even be a principal sitting on this webinar right now. We have to establish and answer that question about why are we calibrating? Why are we conducting this calibration? So we have to garner buy-in, and it's going to be really critical so that we avoid feelings of wasted time. We avoid feelings of, I'm just doing this to check the blocks and comply with whatever's needed, and then I'm going to go back and do what I've always been doing. There has to be a clearly articulated purpose to what's going on. And wherever possible, you need to base everything that you're doing in data if available. And I know Shanna and friends can actually plug in just a little bit on how this might look here in a couple of slides. I built some visuals that could be used to help you potentially show where your ratings are, where they potentially need to be. And there are tools within Strive that can help you do that. And I'll let Shanna potentially talk about some of those here in just a little bit. Another step after establishing the why, because when we think about evaluation, it's real easy to just say, hey, we need to really focus on the T-test evaluation rubric itself. But it's also important to make sure that you are updating and or creating a walkthrough form that aligns with all these efforts as well. Using my district as an example, we had 8 campuses with 5 different walkthrough forms. And the reason for that wasn't that they weren't necessarily aligned to T-test. It was just each campus had individual needs that had crept into the walkthrough forms over time. An example in the gray box there, one campus was really big about implementing the Fundamental 5, and they wanted components of the Fundamental 5 in their walkthrough form as a way of providing feedback to teachers on that. Well, when we are looking at the teacher incentive allotment, some of those ancillary criteria that you might be looking for to support efforts you're actually doing on your campus, they may not necessarily need to be on your walkthrough form. You need to ensure your walkthrough form is aligned across the entire district and across the entire T-test rubric where applicable, and covering those domains 1 through 3 where applicable, so that your walkthroughs truly support a T-test evaluation. Now, that's not to say you can't have some ancillary things that you are looking for and you're providing feedback to. It just may not necessarily need to be tied into the walkthrough form itself. Maybe it's something you fill out on the side through like a Google form or an additional form built into Strive. And be careful when looking at the walkthrough form too, that alignment is specific to the descriptors. You have that specificity, and wherever possible, try to, if you need to realign your walkthrough forms, do it as a group with your entire district leadership if possible, so that everyone feels like they had voice and choice, and what eventually ends up coming out at the end of it, so that you build power and you build buy-in. Provide work time when it comes to working on this. This is an example of some things that we showed our principals when we went through and started doing some of these things. We encouraged and requested that they work in small groups to determine which pieces or which walkthrough should be the base or foundation, and then decide what modifications needed to be made, and then consider the best fit for both elementary and secondary. And that was a big thing to definitely consider if you're at a level where you're not really looking at this for your own campus, but you're looking at it from a district perspective. And when you're making that walkthrough form, it needs to be something that's not only universal, but versatile, so that it applies to both settings as you go through it. Something that's going to be really helpful as part of the starting pieces here is EE-Pass access. Now, when it comes to calibrating evaluations, you need access to some sort of video library. EE-Pass, if you haven't gotten connected to it already, is a great resource you could use, and it's run by NIET. and approved by TEA, and access is free if your district intends to apply for or is currently participating in the teacher incentive allotment. Someone you can contact is Dustin Ladd at Texas Tech University. I've got his email address there, or you can email tia@ttu.edu, and he will give you information on how to get access to the ePass library if you have not done so already. And it's a pretty simple process. He'll just ask for essentially a spreadsheet with names and email addresses and roles for those people, and he'll get you set up for your district so that everyone that might need access to this video library has it. There's another teacher incentive allotment resource that's really potentially helpful when you go through, whether it's what we're talking about now with calibrating evaluators, all the way through some of the other minutia of the other parts of the teacher incentive allotment application process. And I'll just open this website real quick. It comes out of ESC 11. Quick plug for them. Hi, ESC 11. Hope y'all are doing great. And when you go to that website, you'll notice that it's broken down by TIA success factors, and they're basically micro trainings is what they're calling them, and they're self-paced, and you can access them. There's virtual calibration protocols. You can go in and access and see, you get this lovely Google Doc, and it gives you tips, ideas, tricks, and links on things that you can do and how you could do it. And so I just wanted to point you in the direction of that so you could see that it's there as a resource. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time kind of going through that resource. I just wanted to say, hey, there it is. And I'll give you just half a second to potentially write that link down if you need it. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Man, our teacher coming out there. And potentially, if you're not participating in the teacher incentive allotment, but you need to conduct some calibration with your evaluators, you could potentially access another video library out there somewhere if possible. And if any of you know of one that you could access, we'd love to get you to drop that into the Q&A. We could share that. Or go out and find a teacher that you know would be willing to be pre-recorded and pre-record a lesson and use that for your calibration efforts. It takes a little pre-planning, but it's something that's definitely easily done. Okay, so let me dive into an example process here that we went through as Lubbock-Cooper ISD. And so I've kind of talked a lot about tips, tricks, things to consider. And now I want to show you where the rubber hit the road, met the road, and how this actually looked for us. So our timeline for our inter-rater reliability meetings, we established 3 sessions that we offered 3 different times. And each session was 2 hours in length. And that might be something that is or isn't possible within your own setting, but it was something that within my leadership, they knew this was critical, and they gave me the flexibility to run these meetings and get them scheduled as I needed and saw fit so that we could get every single evaluator in the district involved. And so you can kind of see example dates on how we ran those. Just as an example, the first set, we had session 1, 2, and 3 in early September from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. And then we ran the second set of sessions later in September in the afternoon, so that if it was easier for some principals to go in the morning, they could go to those morning sessions. If it was easier for them to go in the afternoon, they could go to the afternoon. And then we actually had a professional development day on October 12th as a district. And the third and last opportunity to attend was a full day training from 9 to 3. And I say full day, but it's pretty close to full day, where we just did all 3 sessions in one sitting with any evaluators that couldn't make it to the other sessions. The session topics are in the gray box off to the side there. Session 1 was establishing the why, providing an overview for the entire process and what we were going to do. And then we spent some time diving into the proficient descriptors on the T-test rubric. And the reason we did that was to establish and realign ourselves with what does proficient look like, and proficient really is the goal for our teachers. And so it was just a great opportunity for us to dig into the specificity and really point some vocabulary and things that were appearing to us and critical to us, and just get some common ideas across the board with everyone. The second session was the we do. So that proficient descriptors was kind of I mistyped here. It was the you do, or the presenter does. And then the second one was the we do, where we actually watched and evaluated a lesson from the video library, and we did it all together. So campus teams were together, and they decided as a campus team what would they give within each part of the rubric for that particular video. And then finally we did an I do, where we watched one more video, and then the principals and other evaluators submitted their scores to a Google form, and we used that and compared that to NIT scores. And basically we're looking for that rate of reliability through basically a comparison with what you gave versus what should have been given. And just to give you an idea, and you may be aware of this already, but even when you get your T-test certification, they allow you a grace of one evaluation kind of above or below. And as long as you are one above or below, but not off by one too many times, if that makes sense. And so we kind of communicated with our evaluators that after we go through this calibration effort on that final one, we're looking for you to be pretty close. Obviously, there's a little bit of grace to be off, but you need to be within one on every single one, and you need to not be more than one off with maybe 5 or so or less, something along those lines. And then I showed them some graphs and charts that I put together using data I pulled from Strive with 2 years worth of rating information for our district. And I compiled it into one district view, and then I gave each campus their own color copy of this for their specific campus. And so they could compare right then and there, how is my campus compared to the district average in domain 1? I can see as a district, there's a little bit of distinguished, quite a bit of accomplished, and a whole lot of proficient. And how does my campus compare to that? Am I way up above the district? Am I way below the district? Am I kind of in line? Did it again for domain 2 with instruction. You can see kind of how the numbers played out for us. And then finally domain 3, and lastly domain 4. And so you could kind of see, just as a district, we were able to have a conversation with each other right then and there. What are we noticing about our patterns and trends thus far, without even really digging into the proficient descriptors yet? What am I seeing? What patterns exist? And then how can I use those patterns to inform our discussions that are going to be going here in just a little bit? After that, we dove into the I do. The I do was the presenter, myself in this case, or Dr. Satterwhite, depending on the session, where we went through the proficient descriptors on the rubric. And then we reminded that when we evaluate, we start in that proficient column. And after we've gone down the proficient column, we decide if we need to move left or right, up on the rubric or down on the rubric. We talked about the preponderance of evidence and what that actually means. It's not necessarily an all or nothing within each column or within each evaluation rating, but it needs to be kind of close. The preponderance evidence needs to really demonstrate that if a teacher is got 4 out of 5 of the bullets, they need to be kind of close to that 5th bullet and not way off that 5th bullet in order to justify a rating. And we really talked about what that means to be proficient. And we all did it when we did our initial T-test training. Have your principals look up the word proficient again and talk about the definition. You did it in T-test training initially, do it all over again. It's not a bad thing to help realign them with that. This is an example of kind of what we showed and went through. And I'm not going to show every single one of these, but when talking with the evaluators in the room, we would go down standards of alignment, and we talked about goals. And we talked about the fact that all means all. When we walk into a classroom, if we have a lesson that's not aligned to the state content standards, one lesson here or there may not be so bad, but if I'm walking in and there's a drift on most lessons when I'm doing a walkthrough, all means all in this case. And we get down towards the bottom, integration of technology when applicable. I'm probably not going to give proficient to a teacher that I ever sit and think, man, I wish they would use technology more. And of course, that does depend on the resources your district has. We are fortunate in Lubbock-Cooper to be one-to-one. And if you're not one of those districts, you have to take that obviously with a grain of salt as you go through it. But that was what was communicated with our group. If you're looking at a teacher and you've ever wondered, I really wish they'd use technology more, maybe they're not proficient in this area. Just as another example, data and assessment, we went down and we were talking about, on this last bullet especially, analysis of student data connected to specific instructional strategies. Are they doing PLCs the way that they need to? And are they using data from formative assessments and summative assessments to choose how they teach? If you walk into a classroom or if you look at a lesson plan and you see a cookie cutter lesson format every time, they may not be proficient. And at the end of this conversation, as we went through the proficient descriptors across the board, we were really kind of honing in on with our principals and getting the principals to even say, holy cow, like proficient is hard. Like it's hard to be a proficient teacher on this rubric, and that's okay. And that's kind of the idea on why it's really pointed on the fact that proficient is the goal. Proficient is good. And I even communicated, I'm a parent also in my district, and I've got a kid at the middle school. And I said, even though as a parent, I shouldn't know what teachers are being evaluated, but let's pretend for a moment I did. If as a parent, I saw that my teacher was proficient up and down the board, I would be a very happy parent and be glad that my child was in that classroom. And so it's really just about aligning mentality. What does good and solid teaching look like in the descriptors? And really re-emphasizing that moving to the left, moving towards higher ratings, you really get into some very student-centered practices in classrooms. After that, that was the first session in a nutshell. The next session we started off and we just briefly went back over what we did on the last time. And then we did the we do, and we viewed a lesson. We pre-selected a 4th grade math lesson and a 9th grade ELA lesson. And we separated the elementary and secondary groups so they can watch those videos. Within this, I linked an evidence sheet. That's just a Google Doc. And I pulled this off of the Teach for Texas website with evaluators. And if you use this, just like I just did, once you get a copy of this slideshow, it'll force you to make a copy, and this is yours. You don't have to worry about editing it. But it's a spot for the evaluator to type their notes and give the ratings while they're watching the videos. LinkedIn. Reminded the evaluators that what we need to be doing is watching it as a group and record the evidence. And then when we were done, we had them pull up the t-test rubric itself and had them talk in small groups, and we scored domain 2 and 3 only. And the reason we scored domain 2 and 3 only is because you don't have access when you're using the NIT videos. You don't have access to the teacher's lesson plans necessarily. And so it's hard to do domain 1 in its entirety. And obviously we don't do domain 4 until the summative. And so that's just not a part of it that we worked on either. And within this we had the campus groups really talk in depth and look at the rubric and compare their script to the bullets and then decide on ratings. And then we talked as a whole group at the end, pulled up NIT's rubric and said, this is what NIT said. Let's compare that to what you said. And now let's talk about it. And why do we agree or disagree? And then once we had that agree or disagree kind of conversation, we were able to pinpoint some of those potential biases and help course correct thoughts and course correct practice. And then finally on day 3, we did the you do. And with the you do, we viewed another lesson. Elementary did a 5th grade science and secondary did an 8th grade science lesson. And each person watched the video individually. Again, linked the evidence sheet if they needed it. And then they recorded, and we watched it as a group. They recorded individually and then they rated individually. And when they rated individually, we were very careful. There's not any conversation or anything like that. And then before you left, and I messed up the QR code on this one on purpose because I didn't want you guys scanning it and sending me data that might mess up our stuff for our district. But we made a Google form for the principals to access and just load in their ratings for that particular video. And we could cross-check it just to say, hey, you're good. Hey, maybe you need a little bit of additional coaching and I'll work with you. Pardon me. And I'll work with you one-on-one. And so that Google form just helped us kind of pinpoint where we might need some additional support. And the last and final step we implemented for IRR, we're actually in the middle of this step now with our campuses. I've got 2 out of 9 campuses that have completed this process. We set up a group evaluation to be conducted on a campus. And the group evaluation needed to be conducted with the entire campus admin team and a district participant, whether it was myself or someone else at the district level that does t-test to help relieve the burden for some of the principals. And in some cases, you could have as many as 4 evaluators walking into the room at one time. And so in doing that and communicating that with the principals, we really reiterated with the principals, pinpoint a volunteer teacher on your campus that is willing to have 3 or 4 evaluators walk in at one time and do the evaluation without feeling super intimidated. Now, I will give you a piece of context and advice on something I have learned in trying to do this final piece of it. Your volunteer teachers tend to be those teachers that are pretty high quality. If you can, you want to get one of those teachers that's going to stimulate some real nitty-gritty conversation on ratings. Not to say that you want a terrible teacher, But those really, really high teachers, if you've got a teacher that really earns accomplished across the board or distinguished in a few spots even, the conversation is less rich. And so could just consider that as you're implementing that as you go into it. And then also keep in mind COVID considerations. When you have that many adults coming into the room, space is kind of at a premium as it is already. And so you may have to adapt and find creative ways to do the group eval. And maybe that's recording the lesson and then doing another self-rating kind of in general with that. But something to consider there. And if you have an exceptionally large campus, like our high school is pretty large compared to the others, and they have more administrators than other campuses, split your admin team and do 2 group evaluations on 2 different teachers with 2 different groups as a potential tip. Okay, so I talked for about 35 minutes, so I went a little longer than I promised, so I apologize for that. Now I would like to open it up to any of the questions that you guys gave. So Shanna and friends, what do we got?
Yeah, well, first of all, there were a ton of thank yous, and we appreciate you sharing, and it's a great model of how to do this process. So we definitely got a lot of really good feedback. And not a ton of questions because you did so great. But there was a question if you guys had any experience with the t-test virtual rubric and doing inter-rater reliability with that at all?
So as a district, we haven't really had much experience with that because we were one of the districts that in late September, early October, we nixed virtual learning. And so while we were offering both options at the beginning of the year, I actually worked to put the virtual rubric into our Strive so that principals could use that for some of our virtual teachers. And right as I was starting to dig into this process and build it, we decided as a district, oh, we're going to cut back on virtual. And so it was a non-issue at that point. So sadly, I would say no, we didn't have any experience and try to enroll that with us. But to throw a potential 2 cents, my apologies, coins are very difficult to come by these days. So we're going to round up to the nearest dollar. So to throw my dollar in, the virtual rubric, I don't know if you have had a chance to really dig into it. And because I put it in Strive for a district, I had the chance to really go through the entire thing. It's exceptionally similar to the regular rubric. And as far as verbiage, they just throw in an occasional or virtual students and virtual learning or, those kinds of things. And so when looking at that rubric, know that what you're looking for is going to be very similar, but you just have to pass it through that lens of what is and isn't possible with virtual learners. Obviously, group work is going to be highly dependent on whether you're looking at a synchronous or an asynchronous model. Group work might be asynchronous in the sense that kids are plugging into a Google Sheet or a Google form or something along those lines, Google Slides, and they do the work together, but at different times of the day. Or it might be that the teacher has a pre-planned class meeting, so to speak, and they're actually doing it live together. And so as an evaluator, you just have to take into context, what does the virtual piece actually look like based on what you and your teachers are actually capable of doing and what the kids are capable of doing. And then just really take some of what you're looking at with a big grain of salt. I would say this year being COVID year, I think we've heard in a lot of areas, grace should be provided in abundance. And so for your virtual teachers and using the virtual rubric, I would try to use that as much as possible. And personally, I was even thinking as we were kind of starting those conversations, but they abruptly halted, really trying to emphasize how has the teacher grown in their abilities as a virtual teacher rather than where did they land on a rating, if that made sense.
Yeah, that's a great recommendation for sure. I think everybody's really trying to navigate the virtual and hybrid worlds today, I'm sure. So that was a great answer. So I had a quick question about which cohort are you guys involved? So like, what is your timeline for doing this? And then what are your deadlines for the cohort for the TIA? Just out of curiosity.
We are cohort D, and if I'm remembering correctly, we get access to our application officially in the start of next week. November 1st is when that's supposed to enroll. And so I'm eager to get that. I'm anticipating it's going to look exactly like the cohort C application. But We have to turn that in April. And so our goal as a district was to get as much of the foundation under us on the building this year so that we could go into our data gathering year next year and then actually awarding designations the year after that. And so we're still looking at, from teachers actually getting money in their pockets, even with cohort D, we're still looking at 2.5 years out before teachers are actually receiving money. But right now what we're building obviously is we're finishing up our inter-rater reliability. Next on the list, and I've kind of got a lot of this rolling now too, is assessment creation for our less traditional courses like CTE classes and courses, so that we can get student growth measured in reliable ways. And our goal is to have that set this year and then use that for a data gathering year next year. And then another big component we're working on is the community communication piece and involving our district advisory committee and helping us make decisions. Because another big piece that we have to build and flesh out is our local designation rubric. Because TIA allows you to build your own rubric to decide who are you going to submit before you actually submit them, and what components and pieces we're looking at for that. And if anyone out there is curious, what we're currently playing with, although it hasn't been adopted yet, so we may end up doing something different, but what we're currently considering is a 50% teacher evaluation, 35% student growth, and 15% other measure. And that other measure, we're toying with student or parent surveys of some kind to really get some feedback from the community on teachers and how they view their effectiveness.
That's interesting. I did see that having surveys, parent and student surveys was a part or could be a part of the application. So that I will be very interested to hear how that, if you guys do adopt that, and how that goes. Yeah.
I'll keep you in the loop.
Yeah, excellent plan. Yeah, and we will keep you in the loop too, because it's very helpful, I think, to it's very well planned out. And there's a lot. I mean, I think anybody that has started to dive into it, if you're already participating in a cohort or if you're planning on it, you can, there's a lot of planning ahead. So it's super helpful to have this available. And we did definitely hear your teacher voices come out in your countdown and your voice of choice. I smiled at that. So you're definitely a true teacher.
Joel was mentioning before we started, for those of you listening, that in a webinar like this, you say something you might find humorous, but as you say it, because you can't hear the audience, you have no idea if what you said actually was humorous or if you just made a fool of yourself. So it's good to know I wasn't completely making a fool of myself.
No. It is. So that was probably the hardest part of doing these webinars is not, especially even not even having people on camera, is just kind of like, you feel like it's out in the ether. Every now and again, you want to say, you guys still hear me?
And for those of you that have ever wondered, because I know I've wondered, am I actually watching something live, or is this just pre-recorded? Like, this is legit live. You've probably been a part of a number of webinars where you're like, is this really just a recording? No, you'll see the recording put up later. Perfect.
Well, we don't have any other questions coming in right now, but I would like to, you did drop a line and mentioned the analytics. I know you shared some things. We do have a webinar coming up on the 11th of next month, so 11/11, and it's I will be sharing some Strive analytics in there, and I'm sure we'll be talking about some of these exact same kind of ideas of the calibration and how to do that in the appraisal analysis and things like that. So look forward to that. We also, we've had some questions about whether people can get a copy of the presentation that you shared, and we definitely will send out in the follow-up email a copy of the recording. And also, if Jeremy is okay with that, I mean, I think you are, of sharing a copy of the presentation. I think
absolutely. And then I guess the only question I would have, would y'all prefer it as just a share from the slideshow or a downloaded PDF?
A download PDF is fine. I might defer to Joel on that for sure, since he posts it, because he does post it.
We can do either way. So I think most people just want access to the links in there. So we can talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah. So definitely look for that. Any final questions anyone has, or any final words from you? This has been a super presentation.
Yes.
So while we wait, I'll do my last plug on myself. Please feel free to reach out to me at any time. My email is on the screen right there. Write it down, type it in an email, send me one right now. I'd be happy to answer any questions that come up, at 2 a.m. I'm like you guys, I'm sure, in a lot of respects. You have those random thoughts, and I know I can't see you raise your hands, but raise your hand if you're one of those that sent yourself an email in the middle of the night to remind yourself to ask something. Yeah, I'm one of those. Yeah, feel free to reach out. I'm not one of those that I like to help because I feel like the more minds we have tackling problems, the better our solutions are going to be. I don't want to be the sage on the stage. I want to be digging in with people that are willing to dig with me. So please feel free to reach out.
All right, super appreciated. And we will, as you guys kind of go along through this process, we will look forward to inviting you back again to share, because I think it's been beneficial for those that joined. So we appreciate you taking your time. I know you have other things going, so we thank you for that. And I see no other questions, so we can sign off for the day.
Thanks again, everybody.
All right. Thanks for
Thank you.
joining. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
We're all waving.
Yeah, we're all waving and y'all can't see us.